Hi, I'm Mara Webster with In Creative Company, and thank you so much for tuning into one of our talks today. I'm so excited to be talking about a show that I absolutely adore, NBC Superstore. Today we're joined by so many fantastic cast members. We have BenFeldman, Lauren Ash, Nico Santos, Colton Dunn, Nichole Sakura, and Kaliko Kauahi. And I wanted to start with you, Ben, in talking about some of the Amy dynamic throughout the show, because it was actually really interesting to suddenly see Jonah without being tethered to her, because so many of your scenes throughout the show and so many character elements had been tied to her. And then getting the opportunity to explore who is Jonah, in his own right, in his own space. And so how did you want to think about him as a character and the spaces that was going to take him emotionally into new and different landscapes this last season?
Yeah, I mean, I have two thoughts. It was nice to sort of explore to answer some questions about Jonah and kind of give him the space to find himself and to figure out how he fits into everything. But one of the things that I really loved about the finale and how we all kind of landed was that it was sort of a commentary on their relationship. They grew and they had these sort of arcs and became the people that they became because of each other to a degree. I think there were elements of Jonah that Amy needed to get to where we landed with her and vice versa. I think it was a kind of an interesting exercise to have her go away and have him be on his own and then have them come back together. And you sort of see this final product that they both created within each other. But I also think, one of the interesting things about the show and one of the things that I loved about it is that I always dreamed of being in a show like this, an ensemble show where everybody is so tremendously strong that any one of us could leave for a season and the show wouldn't falter. The show there'd be no dings. We would continue on and it would just give more space for other characters to bloom. And I think that was something that we sort of learned with America's exit. She was tremendously important to the show, and integral in the sort of fabric of what the show was. But she went away and the show continued on and everybody else had a little more breathing room. And I thought that was one of the really special elements about the show.
Yeah. And then Nico, on the opposite end of the spectrum for Mateo with Jeff, it was interesting how the writers always kept bringing him back into Mateo's life and getting to explore what is that dynamic, what is that friendship / potentially still romantic at times interest between the two of them. And I think the two of you played that so beautifully over the seasons. So how did the two of you figure out what all those different layers and dynamics were going to be as the show continued to progress their story to get together?
Well, I love Michael Bunin, who plays Jeff, is an incredible actor, like one of the funniest guys you'll ever meet. So, it was always a joy, doing a scene with him. And off screen, we had such a great dynamic too. So it was like just, playing around with a buddy of yours and getting paid to do it, which is the best part. But I love the fact that they kept bringing him in, even when Mateo moved on and found Eric and they wanted to sort of cultivate that relationship more than the Jeff Mateo relationship, even though fans were really upset. Jeff and Mateo were no longer a couple. A lot of people still hold that hope. But yeah, I mean, I'm forgetting your question now, but
she just said introduce yourself.
Oh, is that what you said? Okay.
Yeah.
My name is
just your name and your character's name. That was it.
No, I've always loved the dynamic between Jeff and Mateo. They kind of had this love-hate relationship between each other, and I love that they gave Mateo sort of like this love triangle to be a part of. Giving Mateo like a really full actual dating life, which is rare for gay characters on screen.
And then Lauren with Dina, I always love the fact that, she's so OCD, always wants everything done in a specific way. But at the same time, everything that she does is actually channeled from such a place of love and heart, but she'll never admit it. She'll give birth to a child, but she'll never admit that she's doing it because she loves and cares about someone. But I think you really beautifully captured that dynamic in your performance. So how did you approach that juxtaposition and really figuring out the minutia underneath the surface of everything that's going on and where all her motivations are coming from?
For me, the number one most important thing from the very beginning was that I just never wanted her to seem like a sociopath. My note always back to the writer's room was just, we've got to make sure that she still is a real human. She's not a, two-dimensional caricature. She has a heart. She has feelings. She cares about these people, but she is an eccentric. She is somebody who is, bound to rules and all of those things. And so I think, it's easy with a character like that to just write them jokes, through that one lens. But I think, I was lucky that they were receptive to what my kind of take on her was. And it really allowed us, when looking at her that way through the seasons, to have a massive amount of growth. Like if you look at season 1, Dina, versus season 6, Dina, that character has grown exponentially. And I think the thing that's the most interesting to me about playing her in season 6, when she's finally become co-manager, she's, getting to see the store through Glen's eyes, is that she starts to bend the rules. You see all of a sudden that she's like, well, I guess I'm going to have to call in a favor here, or, well, I guess we're going to have to keep this between us, and it's kind of like one of those things where if she had become a manager in season 1, I don't think she would have necessarily been like that. But because she's been through, the growth that she has, helping Mateo when he's trying to escape ICE, and then the fallout of how deeply that impacted her, the fallout from the tornado and how that impacted her. And then that's really when you get to see that her motivation behind rule following was wanting people to be safe and taken care of, and that she takes on that burden. And when you start to look at her in that way, I think that's why people really ended up finding her endearing, was that it wasn't just that she's a taskmaster. It's that she actually has a very deep emotional investment. And so then I just felt like it was such a great payoff by season 6 to get to see her really grow and change.
Yeah. And then Colton, I feel like with Garrett, there's kind of a very similar emotional trajectory in that he's never willing to let his guard down and say what he's actually thinking or feeling. And yet again, you still have to express that minutia and the nuance through your performance. So how did you set about wanting to do that with him as a character?
I think I just sort of I took my cues from the writers, really. Garrett started out of the show just sort of being kind of an announcer, doing the announcements, and early on he wasn't even really that involved with the other people in the show, and so. As he slowly kind of, grew in, we found out, that he really, was connected to all these different people. It was really fun, to find those moments where he could be vulnerable or like feel embarrassed, or the times where everybody else was like not going to work and he had to be the one to motivate people to work. Those types of things are really fun. To find, but you really, and this goes with all of the characters, why it was so great is, you have to have somebody really rooted in order to branch them off into different places. You can't just like make somebody go all crazy because you don't really know what, your zero is. And so I think that, overall with all the characters, from the actors to the writing, everybody did a great job of grounding the characters so much so that then we could explore kind of those sort of different vibes, like when, Cheyenne was going to like all of a sudden go ahead and be motivated to be in charge of the floor supervisor, things that you wouldn't necessarily think that they were going to do, Mateo, the sort of this character who seems so superficial and, kind of a jerk, but then, we have this sort of storyline where he's dealing with the immigration and, he goes through such a traumatic experience that all of us, really care and empathize with him. And so I think that that's one of the strengths of the show is that we were able to ground ourselves so much, but still, make room for all of the characters to kind of stretch their emotional legs, their human legs.
And Nichole with Cheyenne, when we first met her in the series, she was the youngest of them all. She was a young, soon-to-be teen mom. And then when you look at the trajectory that she's had over the show, it's absolutely huge because of how transformative those specific years are. And even through a lot of the relationship dynamics, Glen and Amy had slightly parental aspects in their relationship dynamic with her. But then as she becomes older, she starts to push away from that because she has more of a sense of herself, like Colton was mentioning, when she wants to be the floor supervisor and wants that responsibility for herself. So each season, how did you think about the arc that you wanted to carry on taking her on from the foundations that you'd been building all up to that point?
Well, I have to be honest with you. I'm not a very like analytically minded actor. I feel like I like am more like intuitive. And so, when I would read these storylines on the page about her, making these choices to really step into her own power, it just felt like it felt very natural, honestly, because I felt like that was sort of my trajectory personally as well through the course of the series. And when you are the youngest, you have the most growing to do. So it really felt natural in a sense. And yeah, like we got to see, her mom a little bit, and I don't forget what season that was, maybe season 3 or 4. And so it just became very clear, like you were saying, she didn't really have maybe the proper parenting that someone her age could have had. And so like you're saying, her relationship with Amy and Glen felt very paternal and maternal. And yeah, I just I thought that was really cool that she was able to make that switch and kind of learn how to reparent herself, as it were. And being a parent herself, I'm sure that also probably helped her journey along, because from what I've heard, when you have kids, that kind of also helps you heal those old childhood wounds. And so yeah, it all
What?
sort of
No, it
Oh,
opens
that's
them
not
up.
how it works?
Yeah, opens
No.
them up.
All right,
It's
wrong,
just
I'm
salt.
wrong.
You
I'm
you
wrong.
revisit them on
Okay.
your children.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, mix that up. But yeah, no, her whole journey just felt really natural to me.
And then Kaliko, I'm really interested in the comedic style and sensibility that you found on the show, because with Sandra, what's interesting in your performance is how internalized her responses to things very frequently are. And especially when you look at the scenes that you had, with Sandra and Carol, where Carol, every choice is big, every choice is large. And then you have Sandra kind of internalizing and almost playing the straight woman in response. Those scenes tonally really find this space in the middle through what the two of you are doing in your performances alongside of each other. So particularly for scenes like that, how did you set about thinking about the comedic styling and where you wanted the tone of scenes to land?
Well, this character of Sandra started off as really one that didn't speak, and when she did, no one listened. So I thought that that's what it was going to be like for like the run of the series, and I was perfectly fine with that. But the writers had other ideas, and I think a lot of people who are sort of quiet and insular, it has to go somewhere, like the thoughts and the feelings. And so she lets it build, and there will be moments where she obviously like loses it or gets up on the counter and starts giving speeches and boxing and doing all kinds of crazy stuff. But when she's good about, I think, depending on who she's with, she tries to sort of, because she wants so much to be accepted by all these people. So depending on the dynamic that if she's with Jonah or with Dina, she tries to, figure out where she should be to like keep this relationship going. And with Carol too, they would fight for power, but there can only be one. And I feel like they took turns. Like sometimes Sandra would win and sometimes Carol would win. And Sandra's one, she can accept defeat, at least temporarily, and then she'll come back. You got to watch out.
And then for all of you, so much of the dynamic that you built with each other was this really fantastic, quick-witted rapport that all of these characters had. And the fact that they could pass off momentary jibes and a lot of sarcastic comments to each other, but at the same time, it never felt like the show or the characters were actually punching down on each other. It felt like it felt like that interesting language of love. I'm British, so that's how we talk to everybody that we love. So maybe that's why I connected to it so much. But I was interested in how you all approached a lot of those scenes, because again, it all comes back to the performance and the delivery of it for it to work and feel that way, because otherwise it might have felt like it was being a little derogatory to some of the characters at some point with some of the things that they get away with saying to each other.
I mean, I think this show, in essence, was kind of about family in a way, or the family that you discover, the family that happens to you. And I think these characters early on developed a family dynamic, which is the perfect environment to be able to speak to someone in derogatory, obnoxious, bitter, whatever way. I mean, at least it's how I talk to my family, without it feeling like a direct or at least abnormal attack, with it feeling more like just kind of the casual language, the lexicon that they have. And I think that's what happened in this show. I think these were I think if these were strangers, if these people were just casual acquaintances or whatever, I think a lot of the dynamics that you would see between them would feel a little more jarring. but this was a family, and that's how you get away with all of these things, and that's how you get to make mean things funny, I think.
And also, you hit the nail on the head when you talked about not punching down, because the reason why we can get away with teasing Jonah, for example, is, you know, calling him like a Bush baby or a rejected American Girl doll, is because he's got a very attractive face. If we were saying that to somebody who didn't, then I think it could read differently. But you know, it's again, it's in the choice of how you're teasing and how you're phrasing it. And that also, you know, as some of those burns were just so funny, but it was funny because it was also rooted in the core of all of those jokes, is that he's cute. It's not that it's like, you know, it's not that it's picking apart a real foible. When you get into the real foibles, that's when it starts to get dicey.
The foundation of most of the jokes were mainly just that Jonah's really handsome, which was great. It was a really
I don't remember
special
that part.
It was
Disney Prince.
I'd say 80% of the jokes on the show, Colton, or even the storylines were just sort of right. Is that what you were saying?
This is
Lauren,
taking a turn.
Am I speaking out of
This is
turn?
what always happens. I'm always the advocate for him, and then he turns.
Isn't that what you were?
You make it so hard for me.
I know. You sound like everybody I've ever dated.
And a lot of you were speaking before about who your characters were at the beginning and how they had so much growth and went on such a journey over the seasons. And the beginning of any show, you're always trying to figure out what is the voice of the show, who is this character? And then at a certain point, once you really encompass what that is, then that's the opportunity to really start going a lot deeper with them as well, because also the audience know who they are, and then you can start playing around and pushing them into more extremities in different emotional landscapes. And so for any of you, was there any point in particular where you look back and you remember suddenly feeling like you really understood who this character was and how you were inhabiting them as a performer, and then where you wanted to take them in those deeper landscapes?
I know for... Oh, go ahead.
No, you go, girl. You go, girl.
Oh, I was going to say, for me, you know, Dina is kind of based on a character that I had created years ago when I was working at the Second City. And when I read the pilot script, I was just like, oh my gosh, I know her. I've been playing a character like her for a long time. So I came in feeling like I had a connection to how I felt like this character, you know, acted, how she stood, how she moved, how she talked, how her voice sounded, all of that. So then what was fun for me was finding those places where it's like, well, what are situations and people where that would change? What is a time where we can see her not be confident, for example? So that's why I advocated for a long time, and then finally had my dream come true of getting to see her with her dad. And that was like such a treat for me to get to play, because it was allowing us to kind of change the energy and get to see her in a completely different way. And I remember feeling in that moment, like really trying to like embody what this would mean to her. She, you know, the last time she saw her dad was when she was a kid and he abandoned her. And so she went back to that place. And I made the choice to kind of, at the beginning of that episode, when she's first seeing him, to really kind of tap into that other part of her, into like standing straighter, and like her posture changed and her voice kind of changed. And she was really super smiley. And it was such an interesting and fun way to kind of explore what you could kind of do in that episode. And then it made the payoff, obviously, of them having a emotional kind of head to head at the end better, because we got to see that it was like, oh, wow, this is somebody that has a real deep emotional impact on a character where we don't get to see that very often, which I thought was really fun.
What I was going to say is that, you know, I had modeled Mateo after a bunch of really sharky queens that I used to work with when I did retail. And, you know, he started off as this sort of really just this bitchy employee, the bitchy gay employee. And when they decided to make Mateo undocumented, it was such like a beautiful nugget of information that really that I was able to use and understand Mateo a lot deeper. You know, it really informed why he was so harsh and just the way he is, because the stakes for him are so much higher, and he had to develop this sort of armor around him to protect himself and not get hurt. So that little nugget of information wasn't introduced till the beginning of season 2, end of season 1, where we did that special Olympics episode. But it really sort of like was the missing piece of the puzzle, I think, for my interpretation of Mateo. It wasn't until I had that little bit of information I was like, okay, now this makes sense. Like, because at first it was just like, you know, the sassy employee, and that can get so two-dimensional really fast. But once they introduced that little nugget of information, it really rounded it off. So.
And the interesting thing about a lot of this mention about tiny details, you know, whether it's Dina's parent, you know, dad suddenly showing up, or whether it's Mateo you know, when you got that note about him being undocumented for the scripts, is that on top of that, there's also the exercise in the fact that we don't see these characters outside of the store very often. They mostly exist in this ecosystem. Like, sadly, we never got Superstore Goes to Paris as an episode. And
what the
You're
heck?
sad.
Yeah.
Ben
but
is
was
really
it an
upset
interesting
about that.
exercise in
It's
terms
just like
of
Modern Family, like went to Hawaii every other episode. It's just, it's not fair.
We built it into the show. We couldn't go.
Yeah.
Could have.
got to put it in the contracts on the next show.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But with that in mind, was it a really interesting exercise and challenge in terms of the way that you were constructing a lot of history and a lot of backstories for your characters, particularly at the beginning? And then as you went through the seasons and you would get more detail on their history, and perhaps a parent appears in an episode, were there any moments for any of you that caused a little bit of a U-turn from what you'd initially constructed for yourself in your mind?
Oh, it's a good question.
Yeah.
Turn.
I'm like, where was
Well, I
that
would say
moment?
like the first time that they wrote Sandra having an outburst, I was like, oh, okay, but she's not just the quiet person, you know, like put upon person. And so once they did that, I was like, oh, we're gonna do something else. We're gonna show this other side of her. And I thought it was a one-off. I was like, oh, great, she listens to her shit, and then she'll be. And then they kept putting in these monologues. That was also very strange. Like, I went from not talking to having these huge monologues. And so I did have to sort of navigate that as I went along. And everything I learned about her was literally week to week, script to script. There would be like a nugget of information that I'd have to sort of incorporate into who Sandra was.
Yeah, I think anybody's experience on a show that lasts, as long as ours did, a lot of times, I mean, I certainly felt like Jonah was like a Jeopardy question, like you start with the answer and then throughout the next couple of years you find why is he like this or whatever. And I think you finally get to meet my parents and you see what my brother Jason Ritter came in and played such a dick as my brother, and you kind of get a little piece of sort of where he came from and what is it his parents expected of him, and you learn the different pieces about what sort of went on at college and how he fell out and sort of lost his mind, and you see people from his past, and it's like this, it becomes like a tapestry that's just sort of slowly being built throughout the seasons. And I wonder if that's just sort of what it's like on a lot of shows. But you're right, to the point that you don't see us outside of the store. You get little clues. Whatever can leak its way onto the floor of Cloud 9 is just little crumbs that need to satiate you until the next detail, which was, I think, a really cool way to tell a story.
Yeah,
And
for Cheyenne. Sorry. What? Well, okay. Yeah, I was gonna say, like, Cheyenne, her identity, like, I mean, with the pilot, it was so wrapped up in her relationship with Bo. And I remember the episode where her like old high school teacher comes in and she's really excited about him maybe being like a new relationship for her, was such a surprise to me, because I thought, she's all about Bo. And then this new thing happens. That was a big U-turn, but it kind of like fell in line with this theme of, Cheyenne kind of exploring her own interests and different career options and sort of like finding herself in all those ways. So I thought that was really cool.
But it does say something about the show, I think, that I don't think anybody here could really answer your U-turn question, which I think is great, which I think speaks to the writing of this show. I don't think at any point the writers never introduced something that made us go, wait, oh, that's what's happening? Oh, okay, then I'm going to readjust my approach to this character or this story, which is pretty cool that we went that long without any U-turns.
Was some of that also to do with the fact that the longer you were on the show, the more they were seeing what you could do as performers, what you could bring to these characters, and that there was more of an opportunity for collaborative conversations with them as well? And like, hey, I think my character would actually maybe respond to this situation in this way.
Yeah, 100%. And I think that there was, was a tremendously collaborative. I mean, both Lauren and Colton wrote episodes. You know, we all had sort of dialogues with the producers and the writers. It was always a conversation. This was not. I've been on those shows, and I'm sure others here have, where it's just like, these are your words, say them, don't do anything else, goodbye. And our show is not that. Our show was a conversation.
Yeah.
Silicon Valley. He's talking about Silicon Valley.
For anybody watching this who doesn't have a sense of humor, he's joking. I was not talking about Silicon Valley.
I was gonna say, if you don't have a sense of humor, maybe Superstore is not the right show.
Yeah.
Also possible.
Yeah.
And I love that Ben was just bringing up Colton and Lauren, you writing episodes, and Ben, you also directed, and there were other cast members that stepped into those spaces. And so, you know, whether it was you writing or directing an episode and really just knowing these characters so intrinsically, or those days for the rest of you where, you know that script came from someone who's been working alongside you, or it's Ben or America standing behind the camera giving you directions on a scene where they know exactly how your character is going to respond from every scene that they've played against you. How were those production days a lot different in terms of the dynamic amongst all of you?
I mean, it was great, I think, because there was such a shorthand between all of us already. So whenever it was an episode written by either Colton or Lauren or Ben or America, you know, or Mark taking the director's share, it was sort of great. I think there was an extra level of trust there as well, certainly on our end, like being the actors. Having a friend sort of take the helm, there was provided an extra layer of trust, which was great. But yeah, it's having that shorthand and that language already built in between you guys was definitely a huge help.
Yeah.
Certainly having cast members direct is nice because everybody, like, no one knows the show better than we know the show. Certainly, you know, we're a few seasons in before any of us had directed or written. And, you know, I think we overall had a pretty great experience with directors, but I think there was the only thing that ever could irk anybody is when someone would come in either not clearly having a knowledge of the show or wanting to do something that just did not feel like the show. And we never had to worry about that. If it was one of us, it was like, if it was, you know, Ben directing, for example, I knew that he wasn't going to come in and be like, I've got an idea. And we're going to get rid of the walls, or, like, you know what I mean? Like, it was like, we knew that it's like, this is someone who knows the show, loves the show, is invested in the show, and is going to serve the show. You know what I mean? It wants to produce something that is going to be in line with what we've already been doing and are going to continue to do. So for me, it was like, those weeks were great because you didn't have to go in wondering like, like, what's this going to be? Is it going to be cool? Or are we going to have some conversations this week, you know? Not that happened very often, but we all know there was a couple times.
And obviously one of the elements that works so well is the heart and soul of the show, or the ensemble scenes with all of you, in particular the break room scenes, but there's so many other moments as well which were thrown into the show. And as you got deeper into the seasons, I feel like what you were able to do with those moments and those scenes just became so much more deeply layered, because there's so much coverage happening, and even if you're not the person speaking in the middle of a scene, there's all these character details that you can bring to the foreground. And so what are some of the ways in which you would all think about how you could bring those minute character details into those scenes, even in the moments between your own dialogue?
Oh, it was all about reactions, I think, like sitting there and just really listening, and every time, you know, figuring out what a different reaction could be to the same joke that you're hearing for, you know, the 20th time that day. For me, it was all about figuring out, you know, what new perspective could Cheyenne have about this thing that's being said over there. And so that was a way to always keep active in those scenes, even if you weren't, saying the words at that moment.
And Colton, you would usually just talk if it wasn't your line, right? That was sort of
I'd just say something. I'd always like throw something in there, spice it up, you know.
Right.
I figure I can always just get a little jab in there, you know, have a little fun.
Even if the camera's not on you, right?
Even if the camera's not on, I was just going. I just hop in the chair and just start railing off funny lines. Just zingers.
Just killed a wolf. Personal favorite.
Just Killed a Wolf was the best.
Those scenes took like 6 to 8 hours to shoot because it's so much coverage to your point that you end up doing it every possible way you can possibly imagine by the end.
And one of the joys as well of a show that runs for this long as you're shooting those final episodes is the fact that you can make a lot of callbacks to work that you've done before in previous seasons, and you can build upon those foundations even if it was 3 seasons ago. And when you look at those final episodes, you know, there's moments like Betsy Sodero coming in and interrupting with an annoying personal question about a product. There's severed feet appearing again, and it's twice as funny because it's building on moments that we've experienced with the show before. And so how did you all start to think differently as you progressed in the show about ways that you could foundationally build comedically on some of the things that you'd already built for your characters or interactions and dynamics?
I mean,
Lauren,
I'm somebody
like
who would just try and force stuff in to become canon. Forcing callbacks was one of my favorite things to do, and jamming in my own personal wants for story all the time. I mean, again, like the Dina's dad is because I improvised a joke with Nico season 1 where I said it's hard to trust since my dad abandoned me at a gas station when I was a kid, and then I just kept bringing it up. So not just off screen, on screen, I would reference it constantly in the hopes that A, it would get in because I think callbacks are fun and funny, but B, because I was like, well, it's canon now, so let's go for it. But I think that that's something that was really fun about the show is that would happen in the micro and in the macro. So there would be little things that maybe people didn't pick up on throughout that were little callbacks or call forwards, it turned out even, which is bizarre. But then bigger stuff too would turn into bigger stories, you know, and really we improvised a lot on the show is the other thing, you know, Colton and Mark and myself especially are, you know, would just go and go. But what's cool about that is that then it gets used and then there's stuff in there that it's like, oh, wow. Okay. Well, now we're married to that. That's cool. But because of that, it allows you to continue to try and like call those things back and bring them back. And I think half of it is just about like trying to make other people in the scene laugh. Like that was another thing too. And then it would end up in there and, you know, there you go. So I think it's, I think what really at the end of the day, we were very lucky to be a part of a show that was very creatively collaborative. To Ben's point, it's not always like that. We were lucky that we had a creator and a team of writers that really did allow us to play and come up with stuff. And if it was funny, they used it. And I think it really speaks to why the show has that kind of intangible charm. And I think, you know, a big part of that was just what we all kind of like when dicking around brought to the show.
Well, sometimes too, like because we've done 113 episodes, we forget, I certainly forget what's happened in those 113 episodes, and we'll improvise something, or actually a writer will write something in the script, and then we have to be like, oh, wait, this contradicts what happened in, you know, season 2, episode 5, whatever. And then we're like, oh, yeah, let's get that line.
My parents were divorced. It was just a random comment early on. And then there was an entire episode where my parents showed up together, my mother and father. And so to remedy that, there's a whole storyline about how they separated for a little bit just to facilitate the line from 3 seasons prior.
Like that goes back to what you were saying earlier about how there wasn't a need to U-turn because they would just write an entire scene for you. And then
white
lastly,
privilege.
And then lastly, for all of you, you know, you've had such a gift in having a show that's run for several seasons and stepping away from it and looking back on it. What are the skills that you feel you had the opportunity to really develop or evolve for yourself as actors in working on it? And Kaliko, I'm going to come to you first.
You know, I had never been on a show regularly for this long. So it was the day-to-day things too. Like there's a lot of technical things that go into shooting a television show that you don't really learn until you're on one. And by the end of this run, with the crew and everybody, it all just flowed so easily. Even with the new protocols for COVID, like we were able to do this job. And I think create a show, that was just as good as it had been the past 5 seasons before. But also these guys always leaving room for a new character or a recurring character to have a moment or to grow. And I think having that experience, being able to on the receiving end of that kind of warmth and kindness and collaboration, just makes me want to have that on all the projects that I go on forward doing, creating that space for everybody else.
And for you, Nichole?
I would say this came up earlier today, but like just truly like I was thinking about how easy it is to get really focused in on your own storylines, and you're so in tune with the relationships between you and the other characters, but then to also be cognizant of the entire picture of like all the little storylines going on. And I think that like if I could do this whole experience again, I would probably try to be more cognizant of all those things, because it just added so much richness to the whole show. And like looking back on it now, I'm like, wow, there was really, this world was so rich. So yeah.
And how about for you, Nico?
Well, I had joined the Superstar cast. I had never been a series regular on a show before. My background was in stand-up comedy, so even improvising, I was very green to improvising, and we did a lot of improvising on the show. So I mean, definitely like my improvisation skills season 1 compared to like season 6 were had increased like by a million. Like when you work with such incredible comedians and actors, you can't help but step your game up as well. But like I think like it was an education being on that set. I learned to be a better improviser, a better actor. Mateo had a couple of dramatic scenes that I was really sort of like really scared to sort of tackle, because I'm like, I say dick jokes for a living. I can't cry on camera. What do you want from me? But when you work with such a tremendously talented group of people, and you have that trust and trust in them, like you were able to sort of achieve things you didn't think was possible.
And Colton?
I just learned how to memorize lines.
No, you didn't.
No, you didn't.
Learned how important it is to read scripts before table reads.
He took nothing away from this experience.
I learned how important it is, no jerks. How important it is to, if I'm putting together another project in the future, I don't care how talented the person is, if they have no ability to have like a good interpersonal relationships with other people, if they can't be friendly, if they can't go out and go out to a nice dinner with people, I'm probably not going to want to include them. I want to have nice, fun people. People like Kaliko who buy sandwiches and bring them in to work. People like Ben who will bust his butt to try to find a restaurant for everybody. People who are there thinking about the rest of the cast. I think I really learned the value in that. A lot of time in our profession, we get wrapped up in the star or the celebrity, the one person who's just so amazing, and that's usually a complete illusion. And what's more real is, just really talented people who are really genuine and kind and really fun to work with. And I learned how important it is to have that.
And Lauren?
Being in the moment, in the short term and in the long term, I said all through that I really believe that Superstore is a very special show. I think that when I look back during the winter of my life, I will look back on this time very fondly. I don't think that shows like this come around all the time, both in terms of content and in experience creating them. And that was, for me, that was never lost on me. It was important because, to Colton's point too, sometimes you can get caught up in the minutia too, about like, oh, I have to be there at 5:45 and I have to be covered in pea soup today and whatever. But
I have this Midwestern accent all of a sudden.
But ultimately reminding myself as much as possible during those moments about just being truly grateful. Like it sounds cheesy, but it's really true that it's like, I am certain that in the winter of my life, I am going to look back and trade anything to go back to a 5:45 a.m. being covered in pea soup with this group of people. That's just the truth.
And then lastly for you, Ben.
I mean, they said it, I think I learned a lot about, as Lauren said, and being in the moment and appreciating, and Colton too, appreciating the people around you. I mean, I learned a lot of the same things that I think the show was there to kind of talk about, which is to find and to love the people around you, your work family, the people that are in front of you every day, and to find those moments and enjoy those moments, because life is about that. It's not about the star or the success or the money or the job or anything. It's about the people that are around you. And if those people are incredible, which for us, we were lucky enough that they were, then you live a good life. And so on a bigger level, that, and then and to what Nico said, I'm better at what I do because of these people. I'll never be the funniest. I'm almost always the least funniest person in the room when I walk into a Superstore set. But these improvers, to Lauren's point about being in the moment, improv artists know how to world build in their mind and how to be very, very much a part of the scene in the moment, and they can fill in all the blanks around them. And I won't ever be as funny as these people, but I'm a better actor because of them, because I've learned that from them, what it is to create a universe and to fill in the blanks.
Well, I've absolutely loved watching all of your performances on the show throughout all these seasons. And I think that so much of what the show became is because of everything that you brought to your performances and gave to these characters. So thank you for that. And thank you so much for this conversation as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.